be aware of the very fact that in your contention with evil or in your contention with pain, you can become something bad. So whatever the pain it is, you have to be aware that there are two options. It's either you become a very terrible person or you become a very good person. And being aware of one of these two options ensures that you take the right approach. Welcome back. In week 1, we spent a lot of time discussing about myself and the pain that has built my life. And in this particular part of the session for pain, which is the last part of the pain as an awakener, we're going to talk about the right way to react to pain. Now, again, from the stories, you already know how I reacted, of which part of those reactions is what we have today with the Nebula house. In 1984, in Russia, a man called Fyodor Dostoevsky was accused of treason against the Russian government. And months later, and after several delegations, he was sentenced to death by firing squad. Fyodor Dostoevsky had accepted that it was time to die. He had accepted that, well, it is what it is. On the day of his execution, he had worn the white dress, they had covered his face, him and some other prisoners. And what was his offense? He was reading books that were banned in Russia at the time. So he was also in the literal arts industry. So him and some other prisoners, some other literal writers, were sentenced to death by firing squad. On the day of his execution, he was brought out, white dress, head covered, ready to die. Few seconds before his execution, as we were ordered to shoot, a messenger came from what I would call the government, saying that he's no longer going to be executed, him and some other people. He was sent to Siberia to work for hard labor, something of that nature. And Dostoevsky goes on to write one of the most important books of the 19th century, which is Crime and Punishment, which I'm going to reference a whole lot. Brothers of Karamazov. He is my best writer. He is my best. I don't like calling him an author. Well, he's an author, but he's my favorite novelist, second to Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche. And when you look at his reaction, because he was sent to Siberia, he done a lot of hard labor. After that, he wrote The Crime and Punishment, which is a very great book that speaks about, a man reconnaissance who commits a perfect crime and then starts feeling bad that he had committed a crime. We'll go all into that. But after he had gone through that experience, he writes a particular quote that said, "To live without hope is to cease to live." Basically, what he was saying is he became a different man after that pardon. After he received the pardon, because he had felt this was all over. I'm gone. Everything is done. But he had a second chance at life. I think it's a Chinese philosopher, I can't remember his name, that said, every man has 2 lives. He starts living the second one when he realizes he has just 1 life. Something around that line. So he goes on to write a lot of books. Crime and Punishment, Brothers of Karamazov, great books. The question that plagues my mind when I think of men like Dostoevsky, his name is a mouthful. So I always, to save myself the embarrassment, I just said Dostoevsky. I just wrote it out. But when I think about him, I think about someone who understood that pain brings out the best in you and can also bring out the worst. So we have some people come from dysfunctional families. Father beats mother, mother is something, children are not there, father is absent, whatever the case it is. or even come from very toxic work environment or very toxic friendships or whatever the case it is. And in those moments, you are forced to be something else that you shouldn't be. Friedrich Nietzsche said in his book, he who fights the monster should see to it that he himself does not become a monster. If you stay long enough into the abyss will stay back at you. Which means that when you start attacking a particular dysfunction or crime or a particular evil, you have to be very careful not to become what you're fighting. A typical example of this is the social justice warrior. The push, you will see this a lot of times, the push for gender equality creates hatred for men. The push against racism against black people creates creates racism against white. The sudden hatred for a particular class because of, this class is oppressive, makes you the oppressor. So it's a cycle, basically. You end up abusing the abuser. And we're not saying that you shouldn't confront the monsters in your life or confront bad things. Not what we are saying. What we are saying is that be aware of the very fact that in your contention with evil or in your contention with pain, you can become something bad. When you're faced with adversity, when you're faced with suffering, when you're faced with pain, whatever the pain it is, you can describe it. I think Buddha said man suffers more in imagination than even in reality. So whatever the pain it is, you have to be aware that there are two options. Is that you become a very terrible person or you become a very good person. And being aware of one of these two options ensures that you take the right approach. I'll give you a moment or two. Think about a particular time. It could be as simple as a friend that betrayed you. And suddenly to get back at the friend, you become the betrayer. It can be as simple as absence of fatherhood or your mom not understanding the way this world works. And then in order for you maybe she's too controlling. And for you to understand that, for you to navigate that particular situation, to prove that you can't be controlled, you become a wayward child. How do you balance all those things? So the Oski goes through this pain, and decides to write a book, several books. How do you approach the pain? How do you navigate the suffering? How do you respond to it? So I'm going to take out time to mention two things, to go down the two parts: pain and nihilism, meaning and nihilism. When you go through pain, like I said, you usually have two options: meaning, make meaning out of the pain; nihilism, become decadent, don't care about the world. Like I said, the hero and the villain always have the same story. They always react differently. So let's talk about meaning real quick. I want to come up with a particular scenario, and then we go down the path of meaning. But if someone wants to suggest to me, they can. You have 30 seconds to suggest to me what you can pick up a very bad scenario, and then we can try and see how we can go down the path of meaning. If not, I can come up with one. 30 seconds. 29, 8, 7, 6. I will go with drunk father, right? So you grew up in the house, your father comes back home drunk, and then starts, maybe even from drunkenness, he starts beating everybody up and all. And how do you make meaning out of that, is the question. The first thing such a situation does for you, and I do not say this to mean that it is not painful, but the first thing it does to you is you know exactly what to not do. Especially if you're a man. If there's the male child, he knows exactly what to not do. I should stay away from alcohol, or I shouldn't be a drunk. He knows. So when you're faced with such a situation, the first thing you must set out to do, and it's very difficult. This is easier said than done. So it's not because I'm saying it, then I could be in that situation and struggle to actually do what I'm prescribing. But again, sometimes you have to be able to think of these things as a third person to be able to analyze them better, right? So when you face yourself with such a situation, the first thing you know is this is exactly what I shouldn't do, because your dad represents what you shouldn't do. The second thing you need to do is you need to realize you can be him. Because one of the problems people have is when they are navigating evil is they sit in their high horse and say, I can never be that. And that's the problem. So you have to first know this is exactly what I shouldn't do. The second thing is I could be this. So the first part of knowing what you shouldn't do sometimes can lead to pride, which is this is bad, this is evil, how dare you do it? I would never do such a thing. And if you stop there, life can be funny. Life throws you into such a situation. So that leads us to the second step, which is you have to be aware that the devil is in the detail. So you can be exactly what you hate. So that's the second step. You have to be aware of that. So this is interesting, actually. When I was reading about the World War II, but not just the event of World War II, but precursors to the event of World War II, or better put in a better way, the advent of Adolf Hitler. When you read about Germany in 1935 and how the war started, you will not understand how Germany got to where they were. Now, let me explain what happened in World War II in case some people here don't understand. We are aware of the Holocaust, what Hitler did, a man named Adolf Hitler, the killing of the Jews, World War II, and all the nefarious acts that happened, the concentration camps and all. When you read that story, it's easy for you to sit down and say Adolf Hitler is a bad person, and he is. But it's going to be arrogant to think you cannot be him. And I'll tell you why. 400 years ago, before World War II, there was a man called Martin Luther, who was a Catholic monk, a Jesuit priest. So in the Catholic in hierarchy, lack of a better word, Jesuit priests are like the highest form of. And this was Martin Luther, just to give you a bit of a background, was the man who allegedly nailed 96 theses at the door of the cathedral, stating that salvation is by faith and faith alone. And he went against the Catholic Church because they were paying money for, And this is a righteous man. He's a monk. He's a saint. He's a righteous man. And the Jews also lived in Germany during that time. So the Jews lived together with the Germans. In 1523, Martin Luther writes an article called Jesus Christ Was a Jew. And the reason he writes that article is because the Jews were victims of some kind of aggression, passive aggression from the Germans. So he writes the article to tell the Germans, particularly, these people come from a tribe of which share the same tribe with our Lord and Savior. So he writes it, he tells the Christians to be kind to them, to be affable to them. 20 years after, Martin Luther writes another article, Jews and Their Lives. And then he writes exactly what Christians should do to them. Oh, destroy their books, destroy the libraries. He writes out 8, I think more than 8, but he writes out the way they should treat the Jews, of which became an inspiration for Adolf Hitler 400 years after. Even in Adolf Hitler's book, Mein Kampf, which in German, in English means My Suffering, he highlighted Martin Luther as a worthy and notable leader, as an inspiration leader to himself. A Christian monk who nailed 96 theses on the doors of the cathedral saying, salvation comes by grace through faith. And in a lifetime, he goes from fighting a morally indignant, he goes from being morally indignant to being downright anti-Semitic, to making it as an inspiration leader to a man called Adolf Hitler. That same story, there was a king in England called King Henry VIII, who was against Martin Luther. The Pope at that time gave him a title. I think that title still works today, called the Defender of the Faith, because the king was an opposition against Martin Luther and stood for the Catholic Church during that time. The story gets interesting. He's married, his wife couldn't bear him a child or couldn't bear him a son. So he wanted to divorce his wife and get another woman. So he reaches out to the Pope, the same Pope that named him Defender of the Faith, during the same time, and says, see, I want to divorce my wife. She's not. And the Pope says, the Bible doesn't allow for divorce. His special advisor tells him, oh, king, you're a king in England. Why go all the way to Rome to seek an advice of Pope and all whatnot? Divorce this woman and get another woman, and he did that. And then he fights against the Catholic Church in England, and had made sure that, or ensured that most of the Anglicans, because most of the Catholics joined a new church. So he created a new church, which is now Church of England, which is now known today as the Anglican Church. And towards the end of his life, he beheaded 4 of his wives. He married 4 women and beheaded 4 of them, yes. So now, these 2 stories are important. These are people who started off well, in quotes. These are people who had in their minds, they thought they were fighting immorally, they thought they were being indignant in the right way, righteous indignation. And because they battled with the monster long enough, they steadily became it. And this is so, this is not a Christian academic session, but one of the things I see when I read especially when I read the book, I don't know if this is Matthew now. Yeah, I think this is Matthew. The writings of Matthew on the life of Christ. John the Baptist is a man who foretells the coming of Christ and says, oh, the one who comes, I'm not even worthy of, tying his shoes. And some chapters later, he sends people to Jesus Christ to ask, are you really the Messiah? In the same man. And Christ's ministry was not up to 3 years. So in less than 3 years, a man declares Jesus the Messiah. And the same man in 3 years sends people to ask him, is he truly the Messiah? Because again, obviously, he was in prison, there was Herod and all those things. So back to your story on drunken father, dysfunctional home, whatever it is the first thing, like I said, you know what to not do. The second thing, which is why I made all this story, is you have to tell yourself the truth. You can be that. That's the first, that protects you from every other thing. My father is a drunkard. I understand that. I shouldn't be the drunkard, but I can be it. That is highly important. The third thing you would do, and this is dangerous, is you have to love him. That's the problem. That's where the problem is. You have to love and care, because why? You have to separate the man from the disease. And the reason you do that is not to necessarily cure him from his malady. It could cure him. It could. But what that does is when you show a level of empathy, maybe you connect to the reasons why. And those reasons don't make it acceptable. But they build a level of empathy. Think about it this way. If you see someone who is a drunkard and you judge him, but not even judge him, you go through the first step, this is what I shouldn't do. Second step, I could be this. And third step, you get close to the person, you realize that he had a childhood that didn't give him any better option. You're going to be more sympathetic towards the person. Now, sympathy doesn't mean that makes what they're doing right. It just means that you separate the man from the disease. And once you do that, what happens is it ensures, first, that you do not fall into that trap. And secondly, maybe that becomes the hope that saves the person going through it. Now, the older you get as the child in such a situation, because you are aware of these things, you growing up in a chaotic environment, peace becomes chaotic to you, because now you don't know love, you don't know stability. Being aware of that ensures that when you are able to see yourself overreact or even react negatively to peace and quiet. Yep, and this again happens to all of us, right? So that is very, very important. Imagine that the father who is a drunkard and who beats up his children and all, and I'm not making an excuse for the act, but imagine if the only reason he did that was because he was never appreciated. Now, I'm not making excuses. Maybe he was never appreciated, not as a father, but maybe as a child. Maybe he was abandoned by parents. But when you go through situations like that, the idea is not to save the man, because if I'm drowning and you love me so much to save me, I can drown you too. So the idea is not to save the man. The idea is to save yourself. But like someone says, when you see great men fall, don't laugh. Think or something. There's a quote. Basically, what it means is when you see great people stumble and fall, don't be like, they fell. You have to be more watchful. And that's the whole idea of when Christ tells Peter to watch and pray. Because Peter comes, he was very energetic. Oh, you can't take my master. He draws his sword and cuts the ear. And you would think such a person would not deny Christ. And then he goes to deny Christ. So again, Peter highlights that duality. And I even wrote this in an article where I wrote, I am Peter and the rooster hasn't crowed yet. I think it's an article that is very interesting. And the whole point of the article was, I am Peter, the roaster hasn't called there. It says, I'm still in the illusion that Christ is not my savior. So the roaster crowing reminds me that I have denied my Lord and Savior, sort of, because Peter didn't know what he was doing until the roaster crowed. So I wrote an article like that, and I wrote during a phase where I was like, Jesus Christ, if Casala boss right now, I mean, I love you, but I'm gonna deep, And the reason I wrote that article was I knew that if I was put in Peter's position, I would run. But think about it for a moment. This is a man that cut someone's ear for the sake of Christ, and suddenly he's denying him. So the point, when you go through dysfunctional, I am making no excuse for the father. I am saying you have to save yourself, because maybe that's the only way you can save yourself, or save the entire family. Know that the first point, which is highly important, is this is exactly what I shouldn't do. The second point is, the third point that I made is separate the man from the disease. The second point is, what's the second point again now? You can be him. So you have to realize that you're susceptible to such vices, and that's where a lot of people miss it. So let's go to the part of nihilism. I'll do this in 5 minutes or 10 minutes. My father's a drunkard. I'll drink too now. When he drops his bottle, I'll go and drink. I hate him. The man is a bastard. We don't like him. And then you hate your dad so much that you begin to seek validation outside. And now, God help you. Sometimes you seek the validation in the wrong place or in the right place. If you seek in the right place, that emphasizes the reason why you should hate the way where you're coming from. If you seek it in the wrong place, it makes it bad. Now, the reason why I'm not going to talk too much on the nihilism part, or the part of decadence, is that we're going to talk about it in meaning in darkness, because that's what I'm going to talk about the meaning. But like this particular one is pain as an awakener. So when you go through such a thing, you have to be aware, or you have to declare your weakness in such a thing. So does anyone have any personal story, something that they had to navigate that they want to share? Okay, I'll give you a minute or two to think about it while I try to wrap up. So remember, when life is going hard, and it will, when you live here and when you interact with the world, you're going to meet people who want to bring out the beast in you. Oh, you can't do anything. Oh, I promise, if you can't touch me now. You know those people that want to. And the question is, how do you interact with such a person? Now, sometimes you're like, you know what? Let me really show him what I can do. Just little, so you're aware. And I get it. But you see, the thing is, it's interesting because, let me give you guys a funny story. I had called a couple of my friends, and I was telling them about how I hate the fact that I'm putting in too much work in this whole visa thing, and I've gone through a whole lot more than just the rejection. And he said, so I now tell them, oh yeah, you see, what's happening right now, I don't know if I would want to even apply again and all whatnot. I might, we are 4 or 5, we're encouraging to apply. I say, you know what, maybe I will just apply to Harvard. And my guy said, you can never get into Harvard. And I was like, what do you mean by and this was a very casual comment. And after the call, I had to call my friend. I said, I can't sleep because this guy said this thing. And then I wake up in the morning, I was just going to say, because you said I'm going to Harvard, I'm good, and now started applying. And yes, it's a good thing to do because applying to Harvard is great, but why am I the controlled opposition? Do you get what I mean? And so when you go through life, you realize that people are going to test you, and sometimes it's you against yourself, and that's what I'm going to talk about in the war within. Sometimes it's very easy to see the father as the problem, and to see other people as the problem. But I think I wrote an article. I'm not sure if I published this. Okay, I couldn't publish it because it was just too vulnerable. I wasn't ready to be that vulnerable. Me against me. There are times in your life where the greatest enemy is within, and it's you. And usually it's never the external person, it is you. And when you have to be aware of that, Carl Jung, extremely brilliant, I think is Swedish or from Switzerland, I can't remember where he's from now. He writes about the shadow, an interesting concept that I like. You have to be aware of your malevolence. You have to be aware of the fact that, see, I'm a calm person, but I can be very this. I can be very deadly. If you push me hard enough, I can do things that I may regret. Final point that I want to make. While I hope someone has a story to tell, I was fortunate enough to have a conversation with a sex worker. We had three, so me and two other people, and we were trying to understand. Oh, there are other things to do. Why sell your body? And you come with a very high horse, and we're saying, and she goes, my mom has cancer. My brothers are all destitute. And this woman is the only person who has been there for me. I have applied to 100 jobs I haven't gotten. I have asked for money from people and I'm owing. The only way I can make sure my mom is alive is by doing this work. Now, what do you do with such a story? What do you do with such a story? I sit back and I'm like, okay, you know what? Let's give you some money. He said, let me tell you, Oga, this money where you can give me now, it will not solve anything. I need a constant inflow. I was with somebody last week and the man gave me 2 million. This week, someone's going to give 1.5. And I was looking at this lady and I thought, how arrogant I would be to say, what a shame on you. I don't have a mom who is sick. I've not been in her situation. I'm not saying her situation means it's an excuse for her actions, but I'm saying I've been privileged enough not to be pushed that hard to think about other ways of fulfilling my needs. And she's probably still doing the work, but I left that conversation. She thought I was trying to change her, but she ended up changing me because I left the conversation realizing that it's a privilege to go through life, and even when you're going through very hard times, there are things that don't come to your mind. Like if something goes wrong, that I know I'm never going to think about doing this. But maybe you have never thought about doing a particular vice because you haven't been pushed that hard. There's a book, I think you should read it. It's the Police Battalion Police Battalion. I can't remember who wrote it. I'll think about the author and I'll reference it again. They asked the police this is Auschwitz, Poland during the World War. They asked them, why did you guys commit such an atrocity against the Jews in Poland? They said, because they told us to. And they said if we leave, we are going to be traitors. So they were not forced to perpetrate the acts against very extremely violent acts, right? I don't want to go into the depth of the story, but basically what the story highlights is when you push people hard enough, there are things they do. People go through. If I start speaking about cannibalism and it's something that no one should practice, have you starved? Have you experienced famine? So we're not saying that it's the right thing to do, but remember the second point is the most important thing. The most important thing you should take away from. You have to be aware of your ability or your susceptibility to fall victim of a particular vice, and the moment you do that, it protects you a whole lot, right? So I talked about pain as an awakener, and I believe if I keep quiet for 10 seconds, somebody will come up with something. So let me be quiet. Please prove me right, please. Okay, good. So, week 2, we're going to speak on, or rather week 3, we're going to speak on meaning in darkness. Just to get you guys ready, we're going to look at when you go through pain you do not deserve. Job is an example. So we're going to do every time I take out the man, Job, man. So, and basically it is, we talk about suffering that you do not necessarily, you wake up in the morning and things just start going south, right? And how do you respond to that? And then we talk about the firefly effect, right? Where, how do you find meaning in darkness? And then we would speak on nihilism, like I spoke. And now the reason I'm going to highlight nihilism is the goal is to be meaningful. Anything outside meaning is nihilistic. But I'm going to highlight ways you can avoid that. And we will speak on Viktor Frankl, the guy who wrote Man's Search for Meaning. And then we go into the war within. That's for module 4. So to summarize what we have done for the pain, I had given out a story, my own personal pain and my own personal what I've gone through. I've talked about Frederick Dostoevsky, how he became a great writer, and his experiences, how he interacted with such experiences. I mentioned men who were epitomes of morality, how they descended into decadence and malevolence, and how it's going to be arrogant for us to think that we cannot fall into such pit, and the only way that we can fall into such pit is to be aware of the pit, right? So and then we picked up a particular scenario and how we can gain meaning from it. And then again, these things are not things that I cannot sit down here and give you step-by-step examples of what exactly you should do in like particular use cases. But one thing for sure is the first point, which is very important, is when you have those experiences like dysfunctional family, you know that this is exactly what I shouldn't do. The second point, which is highly important, is know that you can be a victim of it. And the third point is you have to separate the person from the disease. And when I say I said we should love the person, but the love here is not like you should cherish, and no, it is treat the sickness and don't kill the disease, don't kill the man, right? And sometimes the man is the disease, to be honest. And in such cases, it's so hard to separate. It's like trying to save the devil, Bob. Those are extreme cases. And so, thank you all, and we'll see in week 3.